Hey everybody, it's Tom here, and today we're looking at Battlefield 5 on the Xbox One platforms, and to talk about that today is John Linneman.
Hey Tom, how's it going?
Pretty good. Now the reason we're only looking at the Xbox One and X is obviously because we have the EA Access program on those consoles, so we have it about a week earlier than the PlayStation 4 formats. But in a respect, this is an interesting way to experience the console versions and compare them, because it's kind of the extremes from one end of the spectrum to the other in terms of power. So we get kind of the worst case and the best. I mean, we've already explored this game in depth through the numerous betas we've had. And the fact is, we've got a few new things to talk about today. The campaign is obviously new, and the multiplayer maps are completely available.
Right, so this is the finished game then. I mean, this is what's going to ship in a week or whenever it comes out. So yeah, it's great to see it here running on these machines. And I haven't had too much time to play with this version myself. I've played the game before though, and as usual, it looks great, at least on the PC. But I'm looking at the Xbox One version here, and looks awesome on Xbox One X at least, but it does seem to have a few issues, I suppose, which we'll talk about in a second. But first, what's up with the resolution then, Tom? What do we got here on the consoles?
So it's very similar to what we had in the beta, to be honest. I mean, X has a dynamic 4K that goes down to 3360 by 1890 as the lower bounds. Very rare to see it go to a true 4K, but there we go. It looks very crisp and sharp and uses what looks like a reconstruction. There's kind of this strange stippling effect sometimes.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot in Frostbite games as of late. It's a very strange artifact. It has kind of confused us, I think. But overall, I do think it looks good. They handle a lot of the temporal artifacts well, so it's relatively clean, just a little bit soft, but not in a bad way. It looks good.
Yeah, absolutely. That certainly goes for the X, but that is not really so much the case for when you reconstruct lower resolutions. So on the base Xbox One, it's kind of a dynamic 1080p, but it goes down to 720p, and it sticks to that point a reasonable amount of time, and you can definitely see a lot more shimmering. I mean, there's a lot that goes along with that lowering in res on the base console. Like the depth of field is lower resolution as well, and other post effects, possibly lighting as well, volumetrics are dialed back in resolution. So you do get a lot more jaggies.
But it is kind of interesting to think, you know, it's been quite a few years since the Xbox One and PS4 launched, right? And obviously Battlefield 4 was a launch title for that system, and that was locked to 720p max. And so what we're seeing here then is it looks nicer overall. The engine's evolved, a lot of new features have been added. The resolution can go higher due to the adaptive resolution feature. It's kind of a neat thing to see, like how the system has matured since it launched in terms of what DICE can achieve on the old Xbox One.
I mean, shall we talk about frame rate for a sec?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, obviously, you know, 60 frames per second has become the standard for the series on consoles since Battlefield 4. I think they weren't completely stable back then, but you look at Battlefield 1, you look at Battlefield 5, and even the Battlefront games, and they've done a pretty good job of hitting that target a fair amount of the time. And from what I'm seeing from this footage here, yeah, it does seem to be holding pretty closely. But what did you find overall? What's the average level of performance like on, say, Xbox One X first?
Well, it does stick to 60 a lot of the time. There were a couple of levels which notably defied that, which like the Bleeding Steel stage, I believe it was called. There's this segment on a bridge in Conquest mode where basically the draw distance extends far, far down. Enemies are kind of at the opposite end, and we're kind of congested into this one straight. That really hammers the performance on X. And you get down to like 50 FPS, it kind of wavers between 50 and 60. It's enough to stand out, and I don't know if there's any patch forthcoming to fix this. As you say, DICE have been really good with, I think, Battlefront in general, where they had like several iterations in the build-up to release, where things got progressively better and better. But this time, it's out, and barring a day one patch ahead of the PS4 launch, I don't see much changing.
Still, honestly, a few drops to 50 here and there in that range. Not a big deal overall, because it does seem to hold close to 60 a fair amount of the time from everything I've seen. And it's at least comparable or superior to Call of Duty Black Ops 4 in terms of performance in the large environment, so that's good.
If we look at the Xbox One version, it's 40 to 60 in the exact same spot on that bridge. And at that point you start to think, well, this is a bit much, especially if I'm lumped in with people playing on X who are having a much better time of this. So that is not ideal, but I can't say I'm particularly surprised. There's always been a history of difficulty, with Xbox One and large scale terrain, lots of AI, and running the gamut from 720p to 1080p is obviously pushing it.
It's not bad on there, but it's definitely going to be smoother on Xbox One X in general. And thus far we're talking about multiplayer, but have you tested any of the single player stuff?
So the outlook is a bit more positive there. It is actually much, much smoother because I guess, as it goes with the Battlefield series, DICE can script things a lot better.
It's predictable. It's more predictable, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So case in point, they have this great, to be honest, opening prologue sequence where they basically jump between scenarios to give you a sense of the scale of war across every country. They did something kind of similar in Battlefield 1, and they've kind of taken it to another level in this game. It's very arty, and there's a lot of variety in the scenarios. But right off the bat, you're kind of in the Narvik stage, and you just turn the corner, and yeah, the frame rate does start dropping a bit on the base Xbox One, and it's perfect on X. But the rest of the ride, it's really much better than the multiplayer. So, kudos to DICE. They've definitely streamlined this side of it.
All right, so we've got the basics covered then. The resolution, we got that. It's, dynamic res on both. Performance is generally pretty good with some slight dips. So it's exactly what I expected in that regard. But what I did not expect, and what you shared with me yesterday, are the sheer number of glitches and weird things that seem to be happening specifically in multiplayer. It's
definitely more prevalent in multiplayer, but where I first saw it and where I first dipped in was the single player. So that same Narvik stage, if we go on Xbox One, you just turn the corner and all those corpses on the floor start disappearing as you walk towards them. After a while I thought, right, let's switch over to multiplayer. This is kind of the main event for most people who love the series, and it really did feel like every, say, 5-10 minutes, there was something odd that really stood out and takes you out of the experience. So things like the dead bodies were a problem in the beta. They just kind of stand there or hang by the waist. In this game, I've seen a lot of bodies just sort of stood there, frozen frame, that kind of disappear and reappear, and objects that kind of float midair, like a medic bag out of sync with the actual owner of the bag. And, on death, you can just be hit and your body ragdoll will go absolutely ballistic. So all these things, they really detract from the authenticity of the visuals, which are superb, but they all stack up to, it kind of ruins the experience a bit.
What's up with the texture? You sent me a shot. I hadn't seen this myself, but it looked like the game was genuinely struggling to load in textures at a point. It would just sort of remain super low res. Did it ever actually load in, and what's going on with that?
It never loads in, so you're kind of looking at this. Yeah, I think Alex described it as crawling across Chrome. You're expecting that texture to load in, you think give it a chance any second now. I'm not sure what's going on there, to be honest. It's been a problem in the beta as well. We pointed it out then. It's still here on the same map. And it can crop up in other levels too. Again, it doesn't do the game any favors in terms of pushing this grand illustration of war. It just comes across as a bit rough around the edges.
I guess the question then for me at this point is, there's a lot of visual glitches that you've noticed, but has any of it actually impacted the gameplay? Like, floating corpses are one thing. They're kind of silly, doesn't look great, but doesn't necessarily ruin the game. But does it actually hold up? Is it running smoothly? Because that was one of the issues again with Battlefield 4 back at launch, was the game itself was somewhat broken due to the way it was like a lot of server issues and just problems in general from what I recall.
It's generally fine. I haven't noticed anything game breaking yet, and the fact is these glitches are going to catch the corner of your eye a bit, so you'll just stop and you'll think, what on earth is that? And then you kind of carry on. To answer your question, definitely the gameplay holds up. It feels largely 60 across the breadth of play on X in particular, and not so much the case on the base console, but the gameplay does hang together well. And as I say, the levels themselves, I really do love the look of it. All the highlights that we've come to love from the Frostbite engine, the specular mapping, the reflections, it's all there. But then there are some ugly points as well, like the shadows, the base X+1 and even the X to an extent. You walk up to a wall and it's just a blurry smudge of shade, and then like a meter away the cascade kicks in and you get the slightly higher version quality of the shadow. But even so, you know, you're kind of walking backwards and forwards and you're thinking, this really doesn't look great. It should not look this way. Okay, so my perspective of it is they've basically kept the experience intact in the same way Blackout, Call of Duty Black Ops 4 has to keep the map the same for both console versions. So the base console Xbox One has the kind of the terrain, the draw distances, a lot of these elements spreading out into the distance, but it can't handle the up close detail as well, and that's really where it falls short. It's a little bit disappointing. Easily the best experience is on X, as we'd expect, and it'll be interesting going forward just to see what the PlayStation 4 consoles do as the kind of in-between entries between these two.
Yeah, for sure. But you know, I think that's kind of everything we need to know right now on the Xbox platforms. Be curious to see. I guess the only question left for us is one, how the PS4 version stacks up, and then of course I'm very excited to see more of the RTX stuff since they were still working on it back when I last checked it out. Yeah, it should be really cool in the final version.
Yeah, so we'll cover all that in due course, so watch this space, I guess. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me again, John.
Sure thing, Tom.
So if you did enjoy this analysis and want to see more Battlefield 5 coverage, please do like or subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notifications as any video lands. We have the 4K source file to this on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch with me or John, just use Twitter. But from the both of us, thanks for watching.